nous avons avec nous William Huffman, qui travaille avec le West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, qui est une coopérative d'artistes inuits, et qui sera en discussion avec Catherine Bédard, qui est notre commissaire à nous du Centre Culturel Canadien. Nous sommes extrêmement chanceux d'avoir une telle expertise ici chez nous. Donc sans plus tarder, je vous passe la parole.
Merci Catherine. William, bienvenue. Alors, effectivement, par rapport au début de la soirée, ça va être assez intéressant de finir sur un petit point de la planète. On a commencé avec le film de Edward Bertinsky et Jennifer Batchwell, qui nous a fait traverser la planète autour de questions de déséquilibre liés au contrôle de l'eau, au changement climatique et tout ça. Donc, on va aller maintenant, disons, dans un autre extrême, dans lequel on se promenait tout à l'heure avec le panel de Canada Goose, mais sur un point tout petit, celui de Cape Dorset, dont on va parler à travers une organisation qui est absolument unique en son genre et qui est la West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative. On reviendra sur l'usage du terme Eskimo, toujours valable aujourd'hui à travers ce nom. Mais j'aimerais que vous nous parliez des débuts de cette coopérative qui existe encore, donc, 60 ans plus tard.
Merci Catherine, merci à tous. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to talk about something that has become very important to me. My work with the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, my work in Cape Dorset, Nunavut, and this is a very good example of my professional life. I live between Toronto and Cape Dorset a lot of the time. My head office is in Cape Dorset, Nunavut, and the office where I'm based, which is a satellite, is in Toronto. This is 2,500 kilometers difference between the two places. And so you imagine, when I have to do a meeting with my board of directors, I have to travel 2,500 kilometers to have that meeting. And the meeting is in Inuktitut, and it is in the middle of often a blizzard. And so for me, it's been an interesting dichotomy in a way, being based in an urban center and being into the north many times during the year. And Catherine, you and I have talked a lot about, the history of the organization, the genesis of the organization. I think it may be interesting for us just to look at some images that illustrate, what this place is all about, and then to talk about what the organization has done for the community and the region that it resides. This is an image from the 1950s of Cape Dorset. And I'm going to show you an image that I took last year of Cape Dorset from almost exactly the same angle. And there you go. And things have changed certainly, but not a lot has changed. And when you realize the challenges of building in the north, the challenges of urban development in the north, there's not a lot you can do. Houses are a particular scale. Businesses are a particular scale. Things stay a particular scale. So for me, to look at the nostalgic and the vintage photographs of Cape Dorset and to see what I experience now, there is a very clear connection. This is an image of, and these are from the archives of the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative. This is a typical home from, again, the 1950s, an Inuit family you can see around the dinner table. This also a very frequent scene in Cape Dorset. These are children going to school, and this is a kamatuk, which is a very traditional sled that would be attached to the snow machine. And if I wait outside of my apartment in Cape Dorset, the staff apartment that I stay at, I do see this scene now in Cape Dorset. So again, things have changed, but things have not changed. This is a very interesting, it makes no sense if you look at it without context, but these ships are bringing supplies to the shore, and these are coming from what's called a sea lift. And it's probably once or twice a year, depending on the sea ice, that the large objects are brought into town by boat, major boats. And this, again, is something that comes to the shore, and these backhoes will take the items and bring them to their destinations. The large box you see in the back is probably a refrigerator. For the most part, these communities are fly-in only, which means most of the time you have to take a plane into the community, which means refrigerators, automobiles, large objects can't be brought into the community via plane. So you have to rely on these one or two time a year sea lifts. So this is a very famous and very familiar image for those who know about the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative. You see in the back those two linked figures, those graphics, and that is the logo of the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative. In front of the cooperative, you see artists, a few of them wearing traditional, I think all of them are actually wearing traditional costume and outfits. And the gentleman in front of the door is Terry Ryan, a longtime manager of the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, someone with whom I had a very short relationship. He died very recently. So the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative was developed, launched in 1959. It is a community-owned organization. It has been since the beginning. The idea, the raison d'etre for the organization was to create the resources, the space, and the time for people to make art. So if you can imagine, determining what a major industry could be in Cape Dorset, what could sustain a community in Cape Dorset, what would generate revenue for the residents of Cape Dorset, and the determination was it was art. And this is James Houston, who saw the potential in this community. James Houston, who was charged with trying to determine what could sustain this community. And after research, it was arts and culture. And I can't imagine another narrative anywhere where that exists, that the determination is that visual art would be the thing, that the industry that would sustain the community. And here you see an example of, again, from the 50s or early 60s, an image of the print studio in Cape Dorset. When the co-op was founded, they built a studio complex. And the artists were trained in traditional Japanese printmaking to create lithography and stone cut. So you see these artists working in the space, and each successive generation of printmaker has been taught by the previous generation. This is not an art school. This is an industry in Cape Dorset. It's an industry built on mentorship. And here you see James Houston, and he's looking at a stone cut with an artist, and they're negotiating what needs to be done, what needs to be refined. Here's an artist pulling a print off of a stone cut, and if you notice, this is a piece of stone. And if you know what a lino cut is or a wood cut, this is the same process, except they're using stone. And if you can imagine the arduous process in order to create a matrix from stone. And I've visited in 1 month and seen the beginnings of a stone cut, and 3, 4, 5 months later, the stone cut is finally finished and ready to print. It's an arduous process, but again, adapted for the materials that were found regionally. And these are artists inking a litho stone. And it's interesting because people ask me all the time, the printmaking process, this must be an ancient process that was developed, millennia ago. This process was developed in the 1950s. The Inuit art history is a very short one when we think about it. And I keep comparing at the height or the beginnings, the fever of Inuit art in the beginnings is around the same time that the abstract expressionists were working in New York City. So the genesis of this is a very, very short term. However, when you think about 60 years, we are celebrating 60 years in 2019, in 60 years, this has gone from building capacity, introducing and building capacity to make art in this community in the North to something that is internationally recognized. That's kind of a remarkable genesis.
But is it, would you say that, est-ce que tu mets ton... You're going to have to do that all the time. Mais quand même, est-ce que tu dirais qu'il y a une singularité complètement pour Cape Dorset par rapport aux autres communautés du Nunavut, de ce qu'on appelle maintenant le Nunavut depuis le tournant du 21e siècle? Est-ce que c'est un cas unique, isolé? Et pour quelles raisons? Parce qu'on entend parler d'autres arts inuits, d'autres artistes, de cinéastes notamment, de chanteurs, de d'autres communautés inuites. Ici, le cas est totalement singulier. Et donc, comment expliquer ça? Comment expliquer que c'est là que ça s'est passé? Et que ça a marché, en fait. C'est-à-dire que c'est un modèle qui aurait pu ne pas fonctionner, celui fondé par M. Houston.
it's a very good question, and not one that I have perhaps a good answer to, but I will try. I think in Cape Dorset, the genesis of the cooperative, it's an important institution within Cape Dorset, and it's, again, I mentioned, one where the community has such an investment. And I think that with the cooperative stability and what it provided in terms of a studio and in terms of Houston and Ryan and the staff that were part of this organism and still are, providing leadership and training, and the fact that mentorship is such an important part of the culture in Cape Dorset. And I say this because there are other studios, certainly in other places in the north, that have not had the longevity or the strength that Cape Dorset and the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative had. And so for me, I try to parse out what are all the requisite components that make something successful. And yes, you need to have the stability, you need to have the resources, you need to have the place to make the work. And you also need to inspire the community of creators to not only make their work, but to train their successive generations to be able to produce work as well. And I think that's where it becomes a very different and special moment in Cape Dorset.
So we talk about, nous parlons donc de l'importance de l'art dans cette communauté, un peu comme si d'ailleurs il y avait un énorme pourcentage de la population qui était dédié à l'art. Hein. C'est vraiment un des métiers presque les plus importants de ce village. En même temps, l'enjeu principal de cette communauté reste la survie. On est quand même dans le Grand Nord, avec une population de 1400 personnes, je crois. Donc, comment voit-il, alors c'est vous qui parlez, et on aura l'occasion d'ailleurs de les entendre tout à l'heure, vos collègues Inuit de Cape Dorset, mais de votre point de vue à vous, donc, quelle est l'importance de l'art par rapport à l'enjeu de survie, qui est quand même l'enjeu principal dans un village comme celui-là? Est-ce que l'art a rapport à cette survie? Ou alors est-ce un métier complètement à part? Parce que vous avez l'air de dire quand même aussi que c'est un des apports économiques les plus importants de la communauté.
The image that you see on the screen is one of the very early prints that was produced at the studio, and it is rabbit eating seaweed, and it's just that, a rabbit eating seaweed. It's a sealskin stencil, which means the image was cut from sealskin, and the ink was applied with a brush. And the reason I show this is it's Kunoyoak Ashevak, and of course Kunoyoak has had an exhibition, a major exhibition here at the Centre Culturel. And I remember there was a quote. I'm the former executive director of the Inuit Art Foundation and the publisher of the Inuit Art Quarterly, and we produced an issue on Kunoyoak. And there was one quote that I remember from an article that we wrote about Kunoyoak. And she said, "I never dreamed I'd be an artist. I just knew I had to feed my family." And so when you think about what art and culture has done in Cape Dorset, not only has it given an opportunity for people to express themselves, it has been the language that the North has been able to use in the world to inform people about not only the remarkable and magical that happens in the North, but also the challenges in the North. And, the artists from the very beginnings talked about in their work visually some of the things that were challenging, some of the reasons that it was hardship to live in the North. Also, in the case of Kunoyoak portrayed the beauty of the North. So it was a means of communication. And in terms of your question about survival, that is about how does one communicate, a history? How does one communicate a perspective? Well, this has been the language through visual art that the community has been able to do that. On the other side of it, this is one of the very few communities, I think, in the world where you will find so many people who generate revenue off of their art that sustains themselves. And the number of artists that I work with who are full-time artists, where does that happen? Half the time you can never find an artist who is making enough work because they are teaching school or they are, 3 or 4 part-time jobs. I mean, in Dorset, it is very common to find an artist who is, devoted entirely to art practice. And again, it's the stability of the co-op that allows that to happen. The job of the co-op, and in many ways people say to me, Do you represent excellence? Yes. Do you represent, the cutting edge? Sure. But what we also represent is a moment where we can provide people, we can provide the citizens of Cape Dorset, those who are interested in the creative industry, a means to live and to make that expression. And that's a really important part of the cooperative. And so, there is this notion that yes, we are certainly, the motivation is arts and culture, but we're there as a community. We're there as a community service, we're there as a community resource, we're there as a community empowerment.
So we will talk a bit later about the new ways of diffusion of the art today, because this has changed, I guess, since in the last decades. Et je vais faire un petit switch en français, si tu permets. Mais quand même avant, je pense que vu que la soirée porte quand même sur la question du changement climatique et des nouvelles alliances qui peuvent être ou qui ont été créées dans ce contexte, je voulais demander donc à Cape Dorset, y a-t-il des changements majeurs que tu peux identifier qui justement on change complètement maintenant le rapport de la communauté au monde. Je sais qu'on parlait de l'accès par l'eau, pour revenir à l'eau dont on parlait pendant toute la soirée. L'accès, les nouveaux accès que permettent, pour le meilleur et pour le pire, la fonte des glaces, est un changement majeur pour le village de Cape Dorset et donc aussi pour, j'imagine, la diffusion de l'art et sa connaissance.
I thought we should take a look at an image of the tundra. This is just outside the city, actually, and this is such a common vista for me. Again, as a city boy, I never expected that I would spend this much time in isolation and in this kind of a terrain. And what's interesting is, as distant as Cape Dorset is, as isolated as it can be, we've done a very good job, I think, over the course of the 60 years that we've been operating, to connect to the outside world, to bring this work to Paris, to bring this work to Shanghai, to bring this work all over the United States. What's interesting is, it's only recently that we're starting to see an influx into Cape Dorset. And you imagine, just to give you a bit of a profile on the town, it's 1,400 people. 1,400 people. That is an apartment building in some of the banlieues, in Paris. These are tiny communities, tiny communities. And what's happening, if you look at it within the context of climate change and in its broader circumstance, we were used to, curators, we were used to specialists who would come to Cape Dorset because, again, very expensive, it's very distant. What we're now facing is this. And this, in fact, is the Crystal Serenity, and they are running this ship. It's 1,060 passengers through the Northwest Passage. This is something that has never happened before. This is the result of climate change. Now the fact that you can navigate the Northwest Passage, in addition to these large passenger ships, you also have oil tankers. You have a number of transport vehicles going through. And as one, I read very recently from an interview, someone, the Canadian Coast Guard, said this is the most dangerous cruise you can ever take. The reason is, it is one of the most inaccessible bodies of water from a safety point of view. If something were to happen, there's absolutely no way you can evacuate 1,000 people. So that's one problem. The second problem is, how do you bring 1,068 people into a community of 1,400 people? Mm-hmm. And, the problem is that, and I've said this to you, Catherine, in my experience in the North has always been about dichotomy. It's always been about opposites. It's always about contradiction. So, yes, does it make sense from an economic point of view that you bring 1,068 people who have a lot of money into a community that wants to sell art? Of course it does. Does that make, from an economic point of view? Sure. From an infrastructure point of view, this is a huge problem. And so when we talk about the work that we do as a cooperative, it's hand in hand with the territorial government and hand in hand with the municipal government in Cape Dorset to worry very, very, very deeply about these kinds of things. Are there huge issues with this associated? Of course there are. And, and for me, the idea that this is on the immediate horizon means that, I have to become an expert, in a way, in how to build tourism infrastructure, how to welcome, this volume of people. How do we create partnerships with the community, both public and private sector, in order to allow this to happen in a way that's beneficial to the community and can enhance the economic value and the status of the community without decimating it. And I think that's and those are two equally, balanced things for me.
Tout est affaire de déséquilibre et d'équilibre complexe et très subtil dans cette histoire. Alors, il y a ces gros bateaux, ces monstres qui viennent maintenant vers les communautés inuites, et celle-ci en particulier. Et ça va se multiplier avec le temps, bien sûr. Mais parmi les changements majeurs liés au changement climatique. Maintenant, vous avez aussi des nouveaux changements que vous opérez, vous, en tant que coopérative, qui sont de diffuser autrement cet art. Je voulais que vous donniez quelques expériences, quelques exemples de diffusion qui n'existaient pas il y a quelques années, dont, par exemple, ce que vous avez fait à la Biennale de Venise avec un artiste inuit. C'était la première fois qu'on avait une représentation d'un artiste important de la communauté inuit dans un des événements majeurs qui reste un des grands événements d'art contemporain au monde. Et ça a été vraiment une découverte et c'était donc il y a, je crois, 2-3 ans.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and it was, here you are, this is the Rialto Bridge. If you've been to Venice, you know what this is. And for the first time in the history of the Biennale, and this was in 2017, Kananganak Putagut, one of the luminaries of the Inuit art movement in Cape Dorset, also one of the founding members, board members of the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative. Interestingly, there is a genesis to this work which is very gratifying for me. A genesis to this exhibition that's gratifying for me at the Biennale. So Christine Mansal at the Centre Pompidou. We received a phone call from Christine's office from the Centre Pompidou. They said, we'd like to know more about Kananganak Putagut. I thought, well, this is really interesting. We're going to have a show at the museum in Paris. We sent a number of materials, and then suddenly it started to evolve. Christine is announced as artistic director of the Biennale 2017, and then we realized that Kananganak is going to be in the Biennale. So the first time in 150 years, there is an Inuit artist in the Biennale, not representing Canada in the pavilion, but in the curated Arsenale part. So, interestingly, I called the office and I said, how did you find out about Kananganak? And I'm thinking, it might be just a Google search. That's not very sexy. How did this happen? And it turns out that Christine Mansal visited her friend, who is now the director of the Brooklyn Museum. We have a relationship with the Brooklyn Museum. We insisted when one of our artists visited for residency that there was work on the walls by an Inuit artist, so that when she arrived, our artist from Cape Dorset, she would see work from her community. It was Kananganak, and it was that piece, the successful walrus hunt, the boat that you see in the back. This was the piece that motivated her to include Kananganak in the Venice Biennale.
So the reason why there are those pieces in the Biennale is because also you brought that Inuit artist in Brooklyn, right?
Precisely, and this is where
that's quite interesting.
Well, and to answer your question about what is the new world look like for Inuit art? I mean, we were in a luxurious position where the Canadian government was very active in promoting these exhibitions internationally. We would see work going to every embassy and consulate around the globe in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So the work was it was a calling card for Canada. When those programs were eliminated or diminished, it became more of our responsibility to make those connections internationally. So for me, it's now not about Inuit art being isolated as something that has been endorsed by a government or finds its way, naturally into certain circumstances. It's about how do we compete with every other artist working in the contemporary milieu internationally. And so you can imagine how difficult it would be to negotiate a relationship with the Biennale, with a small community in Cape Dorset, a Canadian organization. So it becomes so incredibly important for us to have these relationships, for me to be, equally in my office in Toronto, then in Cape Dorset to understand what is happening in the studios, and to be here, and to be in the United States, and to be, in Asia. And this is, again, the new reality of how we need to do business in a competitive environment.
And so that's your job. You are hired by the cooperative. It's your job to go everywhere and to speak about that art. And I would like to know if, because sometimes you come with Inuit artists, sometimes you go in, you are in a situation where they don't necessarily feel that they should be there. You had some experiences that you told me that are quite interesting because, and I would like you to maybe speak about that. It's not what I mean is it's not necessarily that they want themselves to go everywhere. They want their art to be distributed, diffused, see everywhere, but it's something else also to go for them to go there on the stage and speak about their art the way we used to do.
It's very complex when you deal with artists from Cape Dorset because it is expensive. So pragmatically, it's expensive, it's a distance. You're dealing with individuals who may have a second language, English is a second language, Inuktitut being their first language, or they may be unilingual Inuktitut speakers. These are artists who often don't have passports. These are artists so there are so many things that we have in place that is very easy for me to pick up and come to Paris when I need to. For those artists, it's just not the convention to be that accessible and that available to do these things. And also, as a good talent agent, which is what we are, we need to, in a way, protect our artists from circumstances that are not of interest to them to begin with, that may not be professionally significant for them. And this is where it becomes interesting, because often the Inuit artists get fetishized. Inuit artists see there's a mystique, there's an exotic nature to this, and everyone wants to see these artists. They want to hear them talk, they want to have them discuss their work, and often many artists are not capable or interested in discussing their work in a forum like this. And so, for instance, I'll show you this image that's on the screen now, and one of our artists, Ningyo Kuluk TV, was at the Embassy of Canada in Washington, and it was an interesting experience for me because it was one of the very most profound moments when I understood that we do have to pave a way for these artists. And in fact, we arrived at the embassy and she was tasked with sitting in front of 200 people and talking about her work under spotlights on a stage. And this was something she'd never done before. If you can imagine, you've never public spoken before. But the expectation that these artists will be there to perform is remarkable. And this is, in a way, kind of imposing what we think, an artist who's been trained into the practice of making art, someone who knows about marketing, someone who's savvy around the idea of how do I promote my work? I am my own salesperson. This isn't the case with many of our artists in Cape Dorset. What was interesting is, by contrast to that, this is the same artist, Ning TV, in a residency. She did a 2-day residency in Grand Marais, Minnesota. And it was interesting because we just spent time in Washington, and she said to me, I hated Washington. I hated doing that exhibition. I hated all of the cocktail parties you made me go to. I said, let's just try this in Minnesota. And what was fascinating about this is she was in a studio working with colleague artists, doing what she does well, making art. And so it became, and we've had long conversations about this, and now I've started to think more strategically about where our artists can be placed in certain circumstances. And for Ning, this is new work that came out of the residency. She learned a new process. She has new colleagues. She was able to network in a way that was natural to her. So, this is where, we talked about, I'm employed by the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, and in most cases, my job is a spokesperson for the organization. I'm the person who, when you need someone to talk about what we do as an organization, I'm the person to do it. In the case of our artists, when appropriate, those artists certainly are there to provide voice. But it's not an assumption. It shouldn't be an assumption that our artists are willing to perform, when required.
Yeah, I think this is very important to say that. And you have an image, I think, in the many images you have here, where we see also a result of a trip you did with another artist. So she came back and in Cape Dorset did something that is surprising, that I would like you to show to us, and that probably doesn't fit anymore the idea of exoticism, that we sometimes expect systematically from those artists.
You're absolutely right. And this was a really fascinating process for me, because the artist is Padlu Samueli, and she is fascinated by modernity, architecture particularly. She loves the linear nature of the built environment around her. And you can see in this image that you have a diesel truck filling up a tank. You've got a boat with some engines, a duck, and a landscape. And then what is this? And it's interesting. We spent 2 weeks in Brooklyn together. She was part of the residency I mentioned earlier at the Brooklyn Museum. And we arrived in Brooklyn, and she said, I want to go to one of the biggest towers you can show me. And so, of course, we go down to Manhattan, and I don't even know what building this is. But she looked at the skyline as she's spinning around, seeing Manhattan, and said, this place is made of so many lines, and I want to draw those lines. So suddenly we get this amazing skyscraper in the aesthetic that she's known for, and authentic to her vision and her pursuits as an artist. If you can imagine, I suddenly have curators calling me and saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing? This is a skyscraper from Manhattan. This isn't Inuit art." And I thought, oh boy, so this criticism suddenly is being leveled at me because I introduce artists to different visual stimulus. Mm-hmm. So I talked to Padlu. I said, so Padlu, there's a bit of a criticism around, the work that you're producing. It's, doesn't look like Inuit art. She stopped me and she said, I'm an Inuk. Whatever I make is Inuit art. And I said, well, there you go. The question answered. But this is what I find remarkable, is these moments where, it becomes about, what is around me? How can I absorb this? How can I interpret it? And not about what is expected. And,
So maybe now we should listen to your colleagues in Cape Dorset, because just before coming, you did 2 short interviews, and so those people, you will introduce them to us, but those are not artists, but the colleagues who work at the new center, the Kinojwak Center, that has opened only a few months ago.
Indeed. And the first person is Jomi, who is a colleague of mine. He works for the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative. And you will hear the way that I've structured this, and let's hope that the AV works, that you will hear him answer the first question in English, and you will see, or in Inuktitut, and you will see the English translation on the screen, and then the following responses will be in English. So let's just, and Jomi is the assistant studio manager at the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative. He's someone who works very closely with the artists. He's somebody who has been in several roles, as you'll hear, at the West Baffin Cooperative, and someone who also has been an ambassador for the community in many circumstances when we do need someone to speak on behalf of the Inuit artists of Cape Dorset and the Inuit community of Cape Dorset. So let me just see if this will work.
Well, my typical day at West Baffin Eskimo office is first thing in the morning. I do entries on my yesterday's purchases for carvings or drawings, and after that I continue to welcome people in and work with the artists, local artists who's doing drawings, and also work with the printers here, foam cutters, and lithograph people, and welcoming people from other community or other parts of the world. So typical day is kind of different each day. Well, just at the moment, was having Terry around here, Ryan, who's co-founder of West Baffin Eskimo Club. When I started working for back in '83 as a trainee for Jimmy and Terry, one thing came up that people wanted to fundraise for cultural center, but as you know, the previous government was going for it, but election was on, so new government came up, so everything should shift to change every time there's a new election on. But the best thing that ever happened to me in this moment is the cultural center, because it has been a long time dream of Cape Dorset people to have their work show off to the people around the world, and they get a chance to show their own work in Cape Dorset. So that's the biggest memory I have with the club right now. I think the most important is our printers working in the same building. They get to communicate what they want to do instead of having to walk across the street at the old living gladly. So plus it's very good for the management to have both printers in the same building. So and we have this lovely place for local artists to work on. So there's quite a bit of improvement in working relationships and also work areas. So there's quite a bit of improvement in organization and stuff, doing good stuff here and there. Plus we have a little cultural center at the back of the building, so that helps too. So I think in the long run down the road, KCC will continue to upgrade or continue to show off work to other people in town, not only people, but to the visitors also.
Oops. Now, I hope that may have been a bit muffled. Can you hear it? Was it okay? And the second person is Louisa Parr, and Louisa Parr is the general manager of the Kunoyoak Cultural Center. And the previous person mentioned, Jomi mentioned the Kunoyoak Cultural Center, which I think we'll talk a little bit about later. But it is a new cultural space that was launched in Cape Dorset in September of last year, 2018. It is a 10,000 square foot, quite beautiful center. It is state of the art. It is something that, in fact, when I saw and followed the blueprints as the place was being developed and then the construction began, I never thought this was possible in the Arctic, and it is a remarkable feat. So Louisa will talk a little bit about what she does as the manager of the cultural center.
So we have our very first big exhibition here at the Northwest Cultural Center, which is work of a lifetime, and it's works on paper. We do have some original drawings of Northwest Ashiwak, along with some prints done by lithography and stone cards. This exhibition has been ongoing since our opening since I started in June, I have ran 6 successful elders programs. So what that program is, where elders are able to come here and watch some local documentaries done in Cape Dorset, with some country food like seal, fish, geese, and some fresh fruits and vegetables, and as well as coffee and tea. They are able to come here and communicate with each other. This program has been, from what elders have said, has been great to them because sometimes they don't have a lot of places to go, or they don't go out to visit too often. And when they come here to the cultural center, this is a way for them to interact with each other. But while doing that, I, as the manager of the cultural center, I document some of these programs and take photos, take notes of the way the traditional life was in 50s and 60s, going back to the 50s and 60s, sorry. Well, I am the granddaughter of Kanani Nakutuguk, and growing up, we used to go visit as a family, and he would be there drawing. And over the years, as I've gone to different galleries, and actually I went to his first solo exhibition in Vancouver. I happened to be there for the Olympics volunteering, and he was there. So I got to see his first solo exhibition at the Marion Scott Gallery. That's when I really started finding out that just how much my grandfather was very well known around the world. Because I did grow up watching him draw, or, I only knew him as a grandfather and never this famous person.
So there we are. And you may wonder why they're recorded. It's because it's about 4:30 in the morning in Cape Dorset, so it became a little bit impossible to get people on the phone.
So they work at the new Kenojwak Center. Maybe to finish, can you show some images of that very impressive new facilities? And because this is really the major event that happened recently in Cape Dorset.
And you imagine, I mentioned earlier that construction is such a problem in Dorset. Wow. Because everything needs to be, everything needs to be transported in, and it has to be only once or twice a year on sea lift. So you imagine, every single thing you see here was on a big freighter brought into Cape Dorset. And this center, here's the facade of the center. And this gives you a sense of the modernity of the building and the scale of the architecture. Again, this is an entranceway that you would find in any museum or community center anywhere. The main exhibition space. This is a second exhibition space that is dedicated to the art of Cape Dorset. So always on the walls you'll see work by artists from the studios. These are examples of the studios. Again, these places that are, the only reason you know you're in Cape Dorset is you look through those windows and you see the Arctic Ocean. You could be anywhere without that vista reminding you. And Catherine, this is an image that I think both you and I like. This is at the community opening of the center. We had 500 people from the community. 500 people.
The third.
Exactly. Well, from a population of 1,400, 500 showed up for this opening. And I was astonished. I walked out. I was so busy doing things. I had no idea what was happening outside of the building. I walked out just to get a breath of fresh air, and I looked at it. There's a lineup of people around the building to get in. So it was a remarkable moment. And I think there will be more remarkable moments as this center, determines what it can do and how it can benefit the community and how it can welcome, those from outside, both from an exhibition point of view and from a visitor point of view.
Thank you very much, William. Maybe if there are a few questions, we can take them, and after, I think we will have to end that great evening. Alors, s'il y a des questions à William, pour profiter de sa présence.
Thank you, William. This was a great presentation. I guess my question is, this is a great center and great work. How does that sort of relate to old ways of practice? There was art before that center was created. So what is the link with the past?
It's a very good question, and one that I think us who come from the South always have to be reminded of. So thank you, because we can become so excited about these new developments. We can become so excited about this new building that looks like a modern space. And what is interesting, when we struck an advisory committee in order to determine what would happen inside this space, immediately the community said we need to equally embrace progress and outward looking as we do need to embrace our history and our past. And so, Louisa, if you were able to make it out on her the recording that she made for us, her priority was to bring elders into the space. Her priority was to re-embrace the Inuktitut language. It was to share stories and to record those stories. This is the space, what it doesn't show you, because the edifice is what you see, what it doesn't show you is that we have state-of-the-art equipment to be able to capture words and actions and video. And one of the things that we don't have is an archive, a suitable archive of all of these stories of the old languages, of the reminiscing about life on the land, and perhaps even teaching hunting techniques and those kinds of elements that are part of life on the land. So the center, I think, represents an opportunity not just to look forward and to embrace what could be new contemporary ways of thinking, but also a space where we can start to build that repository and that place for activity that embraces the history of this, the unique history of this community. I hope that answers your. I hope that's sufficiently you're calm about this, because yes, we are making sure that history is part of the discussion with this new space.
Merci beaucoup, William. Merci à vous d'avoir tenu jusqu'à 11h.